morning, everybody. We're going to go ahead and get started on our council workshop for Monday, August 29th. First item on our agenda is responses to our previous questions.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, council members. You had several questions. The first set of questions had to do with the Green Alley infrastructure. It was a presentation that Public Works made. There were several questions, and you'll find a letter from Bill Stowe attached as well that addresses some of the questions. Here today, the first question, what is the estimated life cycle for both the pervious and impervious options? The pervious paving has a life cycle of 20 to 30 years. Impervious is 50 years. Next question on Green Alley infrastructure, is there a type of pervious Portland cement concrete? The answer is yes. There's an example here in Des Moines at the Jasper Winery over off of George Flagg Boulevard. Next question, what are the requirements to replace existing pavement with pervious PCC? In our situation, you have to remove the existing pavement and then 1 to 3 feet of the material below grade and replace that with drainable rock. There is such a thing as drainable rock, and put in a drainage system. And the next question, last question on Green Alley infrastructure, do we have data on soil conditions below alleys, especially in areas like East Village? The answer is yes. There was some testing done at Southeast 8th and Market, and what they found was clay, which has poor permeability. Of course, that condition may vary exactly where you do your testing. Sidewalk assessment policy, several questions regarding sidewalk assessment policy. First question, what factors is the assessment subsidy income based on? Any flexibility given for age and disability? The short answer is yes. Assessment subsidy is available for households that are below 80% of the median income. The household income is adjusted based on various factors, one of which is age, the others are disability and medical expense. Property owners and or spouses that are over 60 years of age or older receive a reduction of 10% of their income compared to individuals below 60 who receive only a 5%. Income from disabled household members other than property owners is not included in the adjusted annual income. So the short answer to the question was yes, those factors of age and disability are taken into account.
Can I ask a question here? It says reduction of 10% of their income, so the more income they earn, the bigger discount they get?
That's the way that reads, Mr. Mayor. I think that Jeb is nodding his head. The answer is yes.
Okay.
I don't know off the top of my head.
Depends on the number of the family, it varies.
I think generally what we use, Skip, I just don't know. I'd be happy to run it down and get a response back to you on that. The next question, again, having to do with sidewalk assessment policy. Do we assess for safe routes to school? In accordance with a policy that the Council adopted in August of 2006, sidewalks on safe school sidewalk routes are assessed at 50%. I should mention to you that on your agenda for this evening, you've got a response back in a proposed action on assessment policy that really came out of this discussion. You'll find what is recommended is a different approach to assessing sidewalks, and it gives the Council latitude to identify which you deem to be as priority sidewalks, and that allows them to be constructed without assessment. But I'd urge you to take a look at that material, and of course we'd be happy to answer questions about that as well. There were a couple other questions. Could a benefited party option be available for areas where only one side of the street would have a sidewalk but be assessed to owners on both sides? The short answer is this came up years ago, back in 1981. An opinion from the legal department cautioned against using it. That approach and that caution continues today. That is to say, it would not be our recommendation to try to assess the sidewalk where you've got it on one side of the street to assess the other side. Not a recommended approach. And the last question had to do with sidewalk projects are currently selected on what basis? Currently, it's by citizen petition or by a council resolution. And those are the systems today that exist to get a sidewalk up and considered in front of the council. Mr. Mayor, Council, that's
I'd sure like to look
Summary.
into that
the 10%.
10% of their income. So a person makes $500,000, gets $50,000, and a person that makes $30,000 gets $3. That's like wrong. Okay. The next item on our agenda is the storm sewer status.
Good morning, Mayor, council members. I'm Dave Miller with the Public Works Department. I'll be presenting this morning. This discussion comes from a question asked on the July 13th council workshop. And there were questions about how the stormwater utility prioritizes projects and builds the CIP. I'd like to start with just an overview of where the funding comes from. The stormwater utility is primarily funded by stormwater user fees. We have been getting CBDG funds, iJob monies, and stimulus funds to help fund some of the projects that came out of the 2008 event. You'll see on this chart that there's about $18.5 million appropriated for this year. Our starting balance is $3.4 million, but our ending balance is $2.5. So we're spending at a higher rate than what we're earning. Transfers to the CIP would be what actually is funding this current year's capital improvements program. That's just under $3 million. Services like our pump station repairs, cleaning of sewers, that's $2.5 million. That's under contracts. And we've got a large debt service, about $4 million in debt service. Again, the stormwater utility is funded by user fees. In 2010, Council approved 2 rate increases, one that'll go into effect July 1st and another a year later on July 2013. The rate will go to 9.19 in 2013. And the rate is based on an equivalent residential unit. That's the average impervious area that a single-family home would have. And that's obviously been very generalized to get to that number. Now, when we determine if a project should be funded by the stormwater utility, these are the criteria we use. Health and safety is typically the emergency projects, the ones where there's a large sinkhole in a street, has to be repaired so that the public can travel safely. Protection of existing public utility infrastructure, that's probably the major one that we get involved with. And the wet weather of 2010 has caused a lot of areas where we'll be coming in with contracts. We'll have about 4 contracts coming this fall to make repairs beyond the capability of our public works staff. So we'll be asking you to approve about 4 contracts for spot repairs around the city. Coordination with other funded CIP projects. Those projects are like street paving programs where we're putting new pavement down. The stormwater utility pays for the storm sewer as a part of that project. Streetscape projects would be another example. Projects to reduce property damage. The Court Avenue storm sewer and pump station is an example of that. Deans Lake Street crossings and Jackson Basin and the closest creek improvements would be good examples of those types of projects. Environmental impact projects. Those would be like the Easter Lake and 3 Lakes Estate watershed studies going on. And the storm sewer that goes in as a part of the long-term control plan for separation of the combined sewer system would also be examples of the environmental projects. And economic development, those would be like the big storm sewer and pump station built on Martin Luther King, and the big pump station built at Agri-Virgin Park. Current projects in the CIP, this is just the major ones. We're funding the Birdland and Central Place, the city portion. There's $3.7 million on that project. I-235, Deans Lake outlet storm sewers, $2.5 million. Deans Lake crossing improvements, that's $1.4. Jackson storm sewer and basin modifications, Court Avenue, and then Tonawanda Ravine. Those are the major projects we're funding. There's some photos of some of the projects that are currently going on. Deans Lake Crossing, that really improves the flow through that system. It'll allow us to drain out the basins up above on Mattern, Euclid, to get the water out of there quicker so we're ready for the next storm event. Jackson Avenue Pump Station and Basin, that'll help that Crawford Creek area drain out faster against a high river level. Court Avenue Pump Station, that'll reduce a lot of the damage that happened on Court Avenue in 2008 and 10.
Will that be done this construction season?
It'll be done by next spring. That's what we're hoping, to have pumps in place by then. Birdland, that's the levee closure at Sailor Road shown in that photo. It's supposed to be done mid-September. And then they're coming in to top off another foot on the Birdland levee. So they'll be doing that after Labor Day. They'll start that work. They're hoping to, they'll go back to the levees after Labor Day and add another foot to take care of the additional elevation needed for that high flow study. And they're hoping to have a ribbon cutting in November on the Birdland levee system. These are future projects that we are targeting. The Corps flow flood study will most likely require us to do additional work on the levees, similar to what's happening up at Birdland, and make some river channel modifications.
Could I stop you there
Yeah.
for just a second, Dave? This first one that Dave is talking about, I know Mr. Meyer is very familiar with it, but this derives out of the report that we got from the Corps in January of this year that basically said our flood protection systems need additional work to afford a 100-year flood protection level throughout the core of our city, and it is a critical improvement. Dave and Bill and I talked about it last week, and it is something that undoubtedly will take city resources to address. We're desperately trying to get federal assistance on that front. It has not yet been forthcoming. We're continuing to try, but in any event, it's a piece of work that is really going to be very important for the city.
That's correct. Once the Corps came to us with this report, it indicated the flows appear to be higher, that the 100-year event is significantly higher than they had originally calculated. We now are obligated to do something to mitigate that by raising levees or modifying the river channel so that we can then be able to certify our levees to FEMA that they meet the 100-year criteria so we can maintain flood insurance behind those levees.
Do we have a timeline as to when we have to certify the levies? And so are companies still able to get the flood insurance up until that point?
FEMA indicated they have stopped the current process for their recertification. They're going to give us about 3 years to react to what's now been shown by the Corps and do what it takes to get them certified. So we've got about 3 years here.
3 years sounds like a long time, but in the world of public improvements, it's not. And so it really does put a lot of urgency into this particular item. And we'll be back, I'm sure, in front of you within the fairly near future, Bill and Jeff, in terms of further recommendations on this.
But
Well, at the end of the day, it's Corps that's going to tell us what we can and can't do. I mean, it's their levy, it's their situation. I mean, we could say we want to dig a hole to China and
Maybe.
It'll all have to be, we have a study going on right now. Once that study is complete, we will be developing a set of projects to send to the Corps.
Just a second. Good morning, Mayor, members of the Council. Bill Stowe, Public Works. Mayor, you're correct, particularly for that area of the levee from Dean's Lake to the city of Pleasant Hill. That is that area that's part of the Red Rock remedial levee. The southeast portion of Des Moines is controlled, owned, and operated by the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers. But that portion of the levee that we're immediately adjacent to here, we essentially have maintenance and operation responsibility, although the Corps still has jurisdiction in the very complex world of how water rights and jurisdictions work for levees. So it'll have to be a cooperative effort between ourselves, the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, FEMA, that is the Federal Emergency Management Agency, which is responsible for insurance-related issues and mapping-related issues. And as you know, Mr. Mayor, from a number of different aspects, including your responsibilities with the WRA as a board member, also the Iowa Department of Transportation is a stakeholder here because of their construction on the US 69 bridge, which has created backwaters into the city of Des Moines. So these issues that Dave and the city manager are talking about related to the higher risk associated with flooding that the Corps has brought to us certainly involves a number of different entities. Dave and Jeb Brewer have been very involved in working with a consultant out of St. Louis on some recommendations to remove obstructions within the channel. As an example, moving some of the bridge structures in a way that would allow a greater throughput of water would benefit us by, as you can imagine, allowing that water to flow through as opposed to build up on the levees and reduce freeboard and create flood risk in Des Moines. All of which is to say a number of different people involved, certainly the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, which we're looking to through correspondence from the city manager to take a lead responsibility for remediating things in the southeast part of Des Moines. But as you know, and really at the basis of your question, anytime we do anything on the rest of the levee system, we have to go through a permitting process and an approval process with the U.S. Army Corps. But the Corps, Federal Emergency Management Agency, the Iowa Department of Transportation are all significant stakeholders in anything involving the levee system here in the downtown area.
Thank you, Bill. So this is the list of the future projects. Here's a map showing the location of those projects. In blue dots, we have the current projects, and the red triangles indicate where the future projects are located. And with that, are there any questions?
Dave, I have a question back on the slide where you talked about the average cost is $9.19.
Mm-hmm.
With technology the way it is today, if somebody wanted to appeal that, I mean, they're not debating about whether or not they have to pay it, but they think that maybe that there's...
Their square footage is wrong.
Right. So technology is a lot different today than what it was when we first approved the stormwater utility. Do we have an appeal process if somebody...
Yes, we do. After each rate increase, there's a 30-day appeal period, and we do get numerous requests for checking those areas.
Okay.
Residential is divided into 3 categories. Half an ERU if they're below a certain number. I think it's 1,500 square feet. 1 ERU, which is from 1,500 to, I'm going to say 3,500. That's I think it's pretty close to that. And then over 35, they pay 1.5 ERUs. And we have a person that goes around and looks at the new mapping and checks the area against that, and then responds to their request.
Okay.
Whether
Okay.
they're
And
going-
you've got 30 days once the notice is published in the paper then?
I think it's 30 days from the date that it takes effect.
Okay, so how are citizens, do they have to rely upon public notice? We don't give them public notice, or is it?
We have a notice going out in the water bills in November.
You can tell
them
I
know
don't pay
of
the
this.
water bill, right?
Yeah. So there's a notice in the water bill indicating
Okay.
the rate increase, and it'll be in this November's water bill.
Okay, thank you.
I think he meant to say somebody pays your water bill, you just don't happen to do it.
That's right.
Okay, just
Thank
want to
you
make that
for
clear.
straightening that out.
I was concerned about your reputation.
All right. Any other questions? Seeing none, thank you, Dave.
You're welcome.
Next item is the residential abatement update.
Good morning, Mayor and Council. Phil Delafield, Community Development Department. This morning in the agenda it says residential tax abatement. Actually, I'm going to give you an overview of the tax abatement program, both commercial and residential. So with that, I'll get started. The existing tax abatement program will expire on December 31st, 2011. City Council must reapprove the program in order to continue the program, and there are options available both for the commercial and residential. Currently, there's residential abatement areas that were established in 1979 with 10-year 100% of tax abatement. There's also the citywide 5-year 100% residential, which was established in 1987. The commercial plan has been amended over the years, and we have some 57 odd different areas currently existing, which makes it very difficult both for developers and for staff to figure out the requirements and also the benefits. As I said before, tax abatement expires on December 31st, but it can be amended prior to its expiration. And if we fail to amend the tax abatement program, it would be very, very difficult to reestablish a citywide program. I'll start with residential tax abatement. As a reminder, you must add 5% to the assessed building value through your project. So our current tax abatement schedules include the 5-year 100% citywide tax abatement, the 10-year 100% in targeted areas, and a 10-year 115% citywide improvement if it's less than $20,000 in value. Those are the rehab projects.
Bill, let me quickly ask, the must add 5%, would you go back to that
Of
last
course.
line?
Sorry.
To the assessed value of the building. So let's say I add 5% of the assessed value to my building.
Correct.
Then I would ask for the abatement for that 5%, or I get to apply it to the whole building?
You get for the 5%, the increase in property tax value, with the exception of the 115% citywide tax abatement program, which gives you more than just the value, the 115% of the added value.
How do you, somebody comes and assesses it? Or
The city assessor.
Say, I'm going to do a $100,000 improvement to my, the assessor does it?
Yes, Mr. Mayor, when the application is made to the Permit and Development Center, a form is used. They claim the value, the applicant claims the value of the improvement. The tax assessor's office verifies the claim and assigns a value to it.
Okay.
This is the current map of the residential tax abatement areas. The light yellow area was the 10-year 100% value from 1998 to 2010. It was lowered to the 5-year 100% in 2011. And just so that we're clear about that, that's the yellow core areas, and the rest of the areas, the darker tan, is the current 10-year. Staff will be recommending here, when I get to the recommendations, that we move to the return to the 100% downtown area.
And what are the boundaries on the downtown area? Can you just help us with those boundaries, Phil?
I believe that's University Avenue on the north side. It appears to me that we go to, pardon me.
Down to the river?
Yes, down to the river.
And how far does it go to the west then? ML King. Okay.
Yeah, thank you. This is the number of residential tax abatement applications that we've received, and you'll notice that they're broken out by rehab and new construction. So there is a difference, of course, between the new construction. The new construction is a brand new home. Rehab generically is an existing property, and there are the 5-year and 10-year $20,000 rehab issues there. So the lower number, the gray area that you see on the screen, is the rehabilitation, and the yellow is the new construction. And this is the average project value for residential new construction. and the same data for the rehab projects. This is the slide that illustrates, Mr. Mayor, your question. This is the requested versus the granted explanation. The greater number there is showing the amount that was requested from 2004 through 2010, and the $729,740,000 number is what was granted by the county.
How could there be such a difference there?
Well, I was just going to try to comment on that.
Yeah.
The $2 million number would be what the homeowner or the builder would say the value of the
That would be
construction
2
was.
billion.
$2 billion.
So $2 billion.
Just a few zero difference there.
But I think I can still make my point here.
Yes.
That was the amount requested. That was the cost of the construction. But when you get around to assessing it, back to the mayor's point, the assessor may say, well, it really didn't increase the value of the home by $2 billion. It only was $729 million. So we have.
That's correct. And remember, again, this is the period from 2004 through 2010. And this is data provided by Polk County to us.
It's not unusual for the actual cost of construction to be significantly more than an assessment that's given.
That's true.
That's typically the standard situation.
And just as a summary, in the metro area, Des Moines is the only city in Polk County with 100% 5-year and 10-year residential tax abatement. We'd also like to make a point here. With tax abatement, Des Moines has the second lowest property taxes of the metro cities when you factor in tax abatement over a 20-year period. We chose the 20-year period because that's the typical term of a mortgage. So here is the table that explains that, and it's based on a $217,000 home, and again over the 20-year period of a typical mortgage. We held public meetings on the residential tax abatement. The public meetings were held on August 3rd, the presentations at 5:30 and 7. We had attendance of about 39 people total, 24 spoke in favor, 1 spoke opposed.
Do you have a breakdown of were they developers, realtors, interested citizens?
I would say predominantly developers realtors and developers in that order, and citizens. These are the comments that we received. It levels the playing field with the suburb. It makes revitalization of existing housing more attractive, more feasible. It assists with the gap on development projects. There was strong comment that suggested the need to continue an incentive for growth and development during these difficult times. It allows the nonprofit developers to upgrade the quality. That was mentioned by Habitat in particular, that they can use the gap there, or that use the funds to raise the quality of the projects that they're doing. And it can also assist in taking vacant office space off the market by conversion to residential properties. And we also heard a quite strong statement suggesting that this issue should be resolved as soon as possible so that planning for the future may occur. And the comments opposed to the abatement, the question was asked, does this tax abatement make sense with the city's financial picture? There was opposition to the idea that a subsidy occurs for developers on for-profit projects, and developers still choose to develop in the other communities, even with our tax abatement program in place. Boiling that down then, council options for residential. The big picture, do you want to keep or do you want to eliminate residential tax abatement? And that is new construction and or the rehabilitation of existing structures. If you choose to keep residential tax abatement, do you keep or reduce the schedule, the 5-year 100% to a graduated scale, for example? Do you want to cap the maximum value on tax abatement, say $75,000 or $100,000? And do you care to expand the downtown area for the eligibility of the 10-year 100% schedule? I should add that the 10-year 100% is limited by law to urban renewal areas that are slum and blight, so it could not go citywide. These are the staff recommendations that we present to you. We suggest you retain the 5-year 100% citywide tax abatement and extend the 10-year 100% abatement throughout the downtown area where it formerly was, and retain the former private service areas, the Woodland, Wilkie, Pioneer, Columbus, and Model Cities area. We also suggest you retain the 10-year 115% abatement for projects less than $20,000, and you extend it to 2016. We also suggest that when the Green Building Code is ready for a good look, we may consider amending to bring it in as well.
Can you expand upon the green building code? When
Sustainability continues to be one of Council's goals, and we are looking at ways that we can weave sustainability into each of our programs. The Green Construction Code now is under development by the International Code Council. Its final readings are scheduled to occur this fall, and it'll be published in the spring. That code is intended to be adopted along with the other family of codes and woven into the review process so that staff would review projects when green buildings are desired. By this manner, it is hoped that the commissioning cost of a project can somehow be addressed at the staff level and not added on at the back end. The Green Code would be tailored to the community for our goals. We would have to decide how and when it would be applied, whether it would be city buildings or certain subsidized buildings where we're trying to incent something, or as we suggest here, perhaps as something to receive tax abatement.
additional tax abatement, potentially.
Well, we're saying the same program. We're saying at this point we need to consider whether or not we would ask, if you receive tax abatement, should you also do something in the green arena to increase the projects?
Okay. Thank you.
You're welcome.
So in other words, they might get more incentive if they built to that green code as opposed to building the no specs at all that relate to that?
We haven't figured that piece out yet, but that's certainly one of the things we could look at. The other option would be just
That's usually what most of the cities do,
Yeah.
that do that, try to help people to make the right decision.
or just incent the green code just by the availability of tax abatement. If you want tax abatement, you must
You
build
got it.
green.
Yeah.
Hey, Phil, I have a question. When we talk about the 115% tax abatement for projects less than 20,000, when did we decide on that 20,000 number?
I'm going to have to ask for some help on that one. Roger, was that with the initial program?
Is that, Rick says it's state code.
Mayor and members of the council, Roger Brown with the legal department. The 120% or 115% for up to 20,000 is a statutory schedule that we're allowed to go up to that level. We cannot exceed that level.
I was just curious because 20,000 20 years ago versus 20,000 now would be
Yeah.
Certainly, it has
huge
not, has
difference.
not taken into account the effects of inflation.
I don't know if we want to take a look at the legislative process for maybe pushing that up to something a little bit higher, but I just thought I'd ask.
Thank you, Roger. Shifting gears now, this is the commercial tax abatement program. As similar to the residential program, the improvements must increase the property value, the assessed value of the property, by 15%. And the tax abatement program currently is a 3-year 100% or a 10-year declining program. As I mentioned earlier, there are a significant number of different plans in place that are location specific. And it includes industrial uses at Central Place, Guthrie Avenue, and the southeast agribusiness area, and the business parks near the airport. This is the number of applications that we've received by year, and the value of those applications for the same period of time. The outlier here is probably the Wellmark project. And again, you see in this slide that we show the abatement requested versus the abatement granted. And this is the average project valuation for commercial industrial type projects. And requested versus granted total value slide again. And this breaks it down one step further, the downtown, non-downtown, and total abatement area. So you can see the total area is in the sort of the gray, downtown in the blue, and the orange or umber is the non-downtown area. So the big picture question, do we want to keep or eliminate commercial tax abatement? Do we want to amend the plan? Suggested is to eliminate the existing piecemeal approach and create citywide commercial tax abatement standards that may exclude specific, perhaps non-desirable uses, and then create criteria separate for the downtown business district. Because
just for a little emphasis, that second sub-point there about creating a citywide commercial tax abatement would be quite a shift for the council. We recommended as staff to you, because what you have today is just a hodgepodge of smaller commercial districts, and it invariably leads to a situation where one of you will bring to us, well, the building over here gets tax abatement, but across the street they don't, and so you end up with very difficult to administer, and I think difficult for you to explain to your constituents in terms of who gets and who doesn't get tax abatement in the commercial arena. I think what Phil and his staff are recommending to you is that we abandon that approach and go to more of a citywide uniform approach, much like you do with residential. But it's one of your key policy decisions here.
Can I ask a question on that? Here's my concern about all this commercial stuff. And are we creating a program, and actually I'd like economic development to answer this at some point. Are we creating a program that will encourage people to come in and backfill into the city? Perfect example, in my ward, Southridge Mall, Southeast 14th Street, and Army Post Road, and Southwest 9th, okay? Can we create a program that's going to encourage people to come in and backfill into those properties instead of moving down on Highway 5, moving to the suburbs? That's the question I'd like answered. These are all great things. It's just a matter of, is it going to have the intended effect? And I think the intent of the council was to create a system where we could encourage that backfill.
Mr. Meyer, it's a great question, and we have considered that during this process. And if I may, I'll answer and then ask economic development to weigh in if they need to.
Yeah, that'd be great.
The current plan, as I mentioned, is piecemeal. We have different plans spotted all over the map. This plan suggests that we follow the commercial areas of the city, the zoning ordinance. So by focusing on where the commercial areas are allowed, those are your existing corridors. And by changing the plan so that it's less location specific, but generally follows the commercial areas, we feel that it would incent those properties to build, to rehabilitate those existing properties along there.
And to go to that point on rehabilitation, is there a program, is this inclusive of a program like the one for residential where you're just doing a little bit of rehab up to a certain number for commercial? Are we allowed to do that? Is that included in this?
As long as it increases the property value by 15%, then it would be eligible. Am I saying that correctly?
Are we allowed by state law to have an incentive like that?
On the commercial, you cannot exceed the statutory schedules of 3-year 100% or the 10-year declining. There's a requirement that those schedules be uniform throughout any urban revitalization areas in the city. There is the exception that we've used for the 10-year 100% residential, and that is within an urban renewal area, you can have a different schedule in those urban renewal areas. The issue that you're asking about, at least as I interpret it, is could we provide a greater incentive on certain geographical areas to encourage people to locate in those geographical areas? That becomes very difficult under the way the state law is written.
That's not, maybe I'm misstating the question. It's more of a sort of like the 115%, it would be citywide. And so, because a lot of the statements I get are, you know, I'd love to rehab this building in a commercial district, but it's cost prohibitive and, you know, it's easier for me to go to the suburbs, Highway 5, whatever. and instead of rehabbing an old building on Southeast 14th Street, they'll go somewhere else and look. And I want to make sure we're getting to a point where we can make it neutral and beneficial for them to come into the city and rehab a building and not necessarily start new. You see what I'm saying?
Yes.
So it'd be citywide, it wouldn't be a specific area.
But the difficulty is that we're already, for commercial tax abatement, where it's granted, our schedules are at the statutory maximum for the commercial. So the only way we could encourage people to revitalize an existing building on some of the existing quarters as opposed to building new at the edge of the city would be to actually reduce the incentive at the edge.
Yeah, gotcha. Okay, that answers it. Thank
You
you.
know, but we have put some programs together, a combination of TIF and tax abatement and that, like we did the DeWayne building, and we're trying to do in some other areas too. So bringing those
Absolutely.
combinations together.
There's other incentives, but I
Yeah,
just want to make
right.
sure we're covering our bases on the abatement stuff.
Phil, would there be a minimum assessed value on, if we went citywide for commercial tax abatement, would we be able to do a minimum assessed value?
You have to increase the value by 15% in order to hit the threshold minimum.
So we're not saying it would just be for any single property?
Correct. Located in these commercially zoned districts, correct.
Okay.
Well, you have a few exclusions.
That's true, we do. The downtown core, we're suggesting be considered differently.
Okay.
On this slide that's in front of you, where it talks about citywide commercial abatement standards, I think it's staff's intent, but when we're talking about standards, those be design standards, construction materials and how it's laid out so we get a quality product.
Okay.
The asterisk down there to exclude specific uses, that's a small component of that. The difficulty of that component is that fundamental to tax abatement is once you grant it, you can't withdraw it. So once you grant it to a Borders bookstore and it converts to an adult entertainment business, it's still got it. So the big thing under that middle bullet point is physical design standards, where the materials, landscaping, those kinds of things. The excluding specific uses, that's something that we can do, but when the Borders turns into an adult entertainment business, there's going to be some of that might happen.
But do we want to, just a question on, do we want to exclude specific uses like auto-dominated uses? And I know we've had a lot of discussion about used car lots in general. Do we want to exclude it if it vastly improves the property and they have to come up to code or what current code is and if they're not grandfathered in?
That's a
Can we
great
do
question.
that? You see
Yes.
what I'm saying?
Absolutely.
So if we have these, horrible used car lots on 14th Street that I'm always talking about, if they decide, well, you know what, we're going to maintain the status as a used car lot, but we're going to decide to come up to what the current standards are, like the JD by rider or whatever, do we want to, just have a blanket, you can't go for the abatement? You see what I'm saying, Coleman?
Mm-hmm.
I'm just asking. I mean, I don't know that, I want to have a standard policy, but I don't want to, shut people out either. So.
Understood. We're hoping for that sort of direction from you folks today. I have some details, if I may, on what the standards are. So here's our recommendation. We suggest that you consider a citywide commercial tax abatement standard, except for downtown, which eliminates the current hodgepodge, as Rick called it, approach. Here's the suggestion, the specific uses, and we can certainly remove that if that's your desire. And we suggest replace the existing plans and develop criteria for the downtown business district on an individual amendment basis. This last point is rather important. It allows us to be flexible to the needs of the downtown area, which are pretty unique in our view.
So it's not a given. I mean, we could have a company come in that wants to do a major development, and if we determine that it doesn't quite get to the level that we want it to, we could withhold tax abatement?
Christine, what's happened in the past in the downtown, and in particular, is you have a major building come in, and they because of prior approvals, get tax abatement as a matter of right. And then from that point, because we
Start
participate in most projects, we have to put additional money on top of it. And I'd suggest to you that's not a very good thing. And what you want to do is make the tax abatement part of whatever incentive package you do. So that's why Phil's making this recommendation here, that you be able to approve those on a case
Rick,
by case.
I think when we've looked at the housing downtown and looked at adjusting that, it's corollary to what you're saying here. As long as abatement's in place, nobody values that as an incentive from the city. That becomes the floor of what anything might happen. And in fact, I was in a meeting last week with a developer that said, well, if we did our project differently, it would take this kind of incentive from the city. But don't count the first $1 million, because that would have been tax abated anyway. And even the developer acknowledges they're dismissing it as a real tool where the city's helping them close the gap.
In some cases, we've been able to negotiate away the tax abatement, but it requires the consent of the developer, and sometimes you use TIF to replace it. But this is a far better approach, in my view.
I'm sorry to keep jumping in, but on that last bullet point, I think it bears clarification that by individual amendment basis, that we would, what we have now is a plan that's been amended many, many times, because when a project came in that the council wanted to receive tax abatement, we created a category for that project, a uniform category for that project, and then those have been added and added and added, so we have so many of those now. The idea here is to wipe the slate clean, but the individual amendment basis, that would be an individual amendment to the plan to create a new category based upon this new project that would come forward, that you just decide that projects of that type should now get tax abatement in the future. You do not have the discretion to approve or reject individual projects, but you do have the ability at any time to amend the plan to create a new category of projects that would qualify for tax abatement, and you can use that to your benefit going forward as you create new categories that are appropriate for now and the future, whereas in the current plan we've got 20, 30 years of accumulated categories for what was thought to be a good idea at that time.
Thank you, Roger. Another point to be aware of is that this will add a step to some projects downtown. So we would come back to you with this amendment in order to go forward. So that may impact timing on some projects.
On these exceptions, under the first bullet point, under your amend the original plan, there's a great project out in my neighborhood, Halley's, which is at the corner of Merle-Hay and Douglas. And I believe there's a fast food restaurant going in as part of a new commercial building that's replaced some, really ugly stuff. I think the project's good for the city. If a fast food restaurant is a tenant in the building, what does that do to that project? And, as we look at that kind of multi-tenant buildings as redevelopment options, does that exclude the whole building?
We would have to tailor it to meet our desires in this case. So it could exclude it. It could address perhaps just the tenant space, or as Mr. Meyer suggests, maybe it's not the best idea and we don't do use-specific exclusions at all.
I think, in to address Chris's question, one of the things that we have in the city, and we've done fairly well, I think, is lay out where we want certain uses by zoning, and because a C-store or a fast food restaurant or adult use comes in and says, I want to improve my building, well, that's good. That's a good thing, I think, because they may not always be that use, and you might as well take the opportunity to improve the building. But if we can bring them up to the current standards and make sure that they're doing the right things in that sense, on the flip side of that is, if we make these exclusions, then they won't do anything with the building and they'll just continue to deteriorate. So to reiterate, and I think that the zoning helps with the uses, but I don't think this particularly helps with where the uses should be. You see what I'm saying?
I do understand your point exactly.
Opposed to that, Rick.
I'm listening, I'm taking notes.
These would be the suggested commercial tax abatement standards. We would like the property to comply with the site plan standards regardless of whether or not the property would otherwise be required to meet the site plan standards. So landscaping and install public sidewalks, that's an interesting point. This is an opportunity, we believe, to do the infill of the sidewalks where we might not otherwise have opportunities. We're suggesting an upgraded exterior building finish, some percentage of higher grade materials, putting the public utilities underground if possible. We're suggesting that monument signs over pole-mounted signs might be desirable. We're also suggesting the removal of obsolete pavement and curb drops and sign structures, improve the drive approaches, retain the historic significance of buildings, and we also have a point here of improved sustainability, and we suggest that they have a menu of options that they may choose from. We suggest 4 sustainability features chosen from this list. Options are always good for the developers. We feel that many of these will improve the green aspects of the building. So, Mr. Meyer, you see redevelopment of a previously developed site is one of your points here. That's the last one, I guess. Also, we're focusing on the new DART mapping process. We are suggesting that we weave our programs in with theirs as tightly as we can.
I like that.
And then the downtown core overlay district, again, you need to comply with the design standards, and will probably necessitate some future amendments as this goes forward. So here's a summary of our recommendations. We suggest residential tax abatement as is, reestablish the 10-year 100% downtown. We suggest creation of citywide non-residential commercial standards and tax abatement criteria for the downtown business district. And again, we suggest extending it until 2016. These are the next steps. We're asking you for some direction today, and then we need to, we hope to have first reading coming up in September.
Phil, I'm just trying to think through the citywide commercial tax abatement. Would there be pockets that you can just talk about off the top of your head that currently don't have it that would be getting it? For example, I'm thinking Ingersoll Avenue or University Avenue.
Most of the corridors, we're suggesting following the zoning, the comprehensive plan, where commercial tax abatement is allowed by the zoning ordinance. Tax abatement would be available, but we're suggesting that the tax abatement be used to increase the value of the project itself.
But are there certain kind of big areas, corridors that currently don't have it that will now be getting it? That just, I'm just trying to think through.
To answer the question that you've raised and that Mr. Meyer raised, maybe what we could do is come back at your next workshop and respond to those specifically and give you a chance to think about it from now until then, and then we can be more definitive about the responses, because you're asking really important questions, and I want to make sure we answer it accurately rather than just off the top of our head.
Right.
So and maybe we can have a second discussion at that time.
And with that, just some staff thoughts on, I think that's a good thing. Let's just take Ingersoll, for instance. I think it's a good thing. But we've also had a request that we establish a TIF district too, which, you know, to feed the TIF pot, you don't want abatement. You know, so, the abatement doesn't create anything. Right. And so, sometimes by establishing this in some areas, we're going to lessen the ability of the neighborhood to reach their neighborhood goals. We might be able to help some individual projects with abatement, but that doesn't help the neighborhood goal. When
those are great points, and we need to look at that some more, and I think bring it back here and give you a chance to think about it a little bit, give you more definitive information about that.
To add to that, Phil, would we be able to, when we're looking at what would be the impact where we have it, where we don't, do we have numbers based upon the permits that have been issued the last few years that we could determine what would have been the potential impact on the city we had abatement in those areas?
We can tell you the number of permits that were in those areas that don't presently have tax abatement. Yes.
Okay.
Hard to gauge whether or not the project would have gone forward or not,
Okay.
with or without tax abatement. That would be speculation.
And so the city of Des Moines then, looking at commercial tax abatement on a citywide basis, that would be unique to the city of Des Moines. And is it fair to say that none of the surrounding communities have citywide commercial tax abatement?
Yes. Is that correct?
I think the answer is yes, but I'm not,
Yeah. I think you're right.
okay.
We can check on it, though.
We'll check on that, yes.
Phil, on your 10-year residential tax abatement areas, when were those areas established?
1987?
The 10-year 100% areas were some of the original urban revitalization areas. And the citywide came in 87. Citywide then provided the 5-year 100%. But the 10-year areas are actually started out as individual areas prior to the citywide.
Thank
And
you.
they were pooled into the citywide area.
I think that should be readdressed too. I think with the annexations and things that have gone on, we need to take another look at that residential aspect.
And what would be the criteria for them to qualify for 10-year versus 5?
Well, I guess I would be looking for them to advise this, because I'm looking at the northeast area, which is very small compared to the other areas that we have. And I think that's one of the things I'd like to see addressed.
There's a huge section of the south side that's not even involved in this, that when you think about it, I think they could use some tax abatement down there also.
The 5-year plans are available throughout the city. The 10-year has to be limited to the urban renewal areas.
Rick, I don't know if we're wrapping up this section, but your last comment about bringing some stuff back to us, does that change the anticipated timeline on the downtown or the other things? Are we going to press forward with setting hearings and doing all that?
Well, some of
I
you
think
have
we
mentioned
should.
to me that we really need to push this along. And Phil made the point, I think, during his presentation, that you've got a lot of developers and builders that want to know what you're going to do. So our intention is to move this pretty quickly, but I think there's enough time to bring it back at the next session, and maybe we can have some action items ready for you about then as well. And we'll have a chance between now and our next workshop to dialogue about it, and I'd encourage that so we can make sure we're getting to the point where you want to be. But we are going to try to move this along quickly rather than
I think
slowly.
the worst position for the city is to be not to be predictable, and so the quicker we can work our way through this, now that we've created big questions, the better it is.
We understand.
And let me just echo that, because if you stop and think about the developers, they're already into 2012. And they don't know, because the city is really, I think, a little bit behind the 8 ball on taking action on this. From where I'm at, I'm very supportive. I know there's some tweaking things that we need to look at, but I think the message that needs to go out to the community and the developers is we're supportive. There might be some questions about, some exclusions or a few things or maybe some different areas, but I think the message needs to be that this has worked very, very effectively. We've had public hearings on it. I know I've had some contact from community, but overall it's been very, very positive and supportive.
Mr. Mayor, council members, what I suggest that we do is we'll try to respond to the various questions that have come up here, and we'll also try to prep it for action items on your next agenda as well. So we'll try to cover it. And between now and then, we'll talk to all of you and try to make sure we're addressing the issues that you want to have addressed.
I guess I'd also like to know what the suburbs are doing, if we're staying competitive in that for our development.
Mr. Coleman?
Rick, I appreciate that the way staff's going to approach it. I asked Phil to go back to this page of the presentation. It's page 25, I think. But what struck me, especially when Councilmember Meyer was speaking, is that if you look at 2010, the blue downtown, if you take out 2008, 210 was at or above the average over the last 6 years. That what's going on downtown. But if you look at this kind of steady decline of commercial outside of downtown, you know, as Brian pointed out in his ward, it's Southwest 9th and East 14th Street, Army Post, Euclid on the north. I mean, there's a lot of corridors that have been really slow to have any energy happen. That to me, that grid right there is kind of the challenge before us. You know, can staff come back with a lot of confidence that the program that you're proposing can bend that curve a little bit back up? It's not just managing this program around resources. We really have to do something to spur development on these streets and corridors that are close to dying.
Mr. Coleman, council members, we will certainly do that. We understand your comments here. I think generally are all about trying to use tax abatement in a smart way to encourage growth and development within the city. Keep in mind, a lot of the trend lines that relate to development have very little to do with tax abatement and more to do with the general state of the economy. But within that scope, we understand your attention, and we'll do our best to hit that target for you.
I think it's important to remember that it's always very difficult in the city of Des Moines to do development, and it's not because of us not responding, it's because you have existing infrastructure in place, and so that makes it more challenging, whereas if you have just a
Cornfield.
A cornfield. I mean, it makes it all, it's all the difference in the world, and so we have to be very strategic in what we offer businesses and residents to ensure that we're at the top of the list.
Understand.
Phil, let me make a couple of comments. I think some of your slides were somewhat telling. I look at the one on the number of real estate tax abatements applications 2004 through 2010. I'm assuming that 2011 pretty much mirrors or maybe even is less than what happened in 2010. But I think it provides us that slowdown in development, not only residentially but commercially, an opportunity to rethink, because it's not just happening here, it's happening all across Iowa and certainly around the country. And I think all the input that you've received here this morning is part of that rethink that we have an opportunity. So rather than rather than go down a road that takes us into a slight retrofit of a paradigm that was created in the 70s, let's think how Southridge and Beaverdale and Northeast 14th, the Eastgate area, all these areas around the city, how do they become alive and vibrant in a 21st century kind of a way? We talked when Mario Gondosolinas was in here about what downtown looks like, what makes our downtown attractive. Certainly tax abatement is part of it, but what do we do otherwise that helps create that connectivity and make it an exciting, inviting place for people to live and people to do business? I think that if we just think that tax abatement of and by itself is going to be the solution, we're just continuing to go down a path that I'm not sure is the only reason that people locate here. I mean, they talk about all those incentives, but are more people buying and building homes here, or are they building somewhere else? Right. And is somebody convinced them that Des Moines area is a great place to be, and if so, why? And is that only for today? What is it that we do? We talked about trolleys. We've seen what happens not only here, but we've seen internationally what happens around the trolley lines, and they become incentives, and people start developing commercially and residentially around those lines. It's solid infrastructure. They know what's going to happen. We talk about other types of infrastructure. I think it has to be a broader think than just what we're doing with tax abatement, is we look at what are the pieces we're going to use to move everything forward, and whether it's green building codes or whether it's all these other things, what makes Des Moines a great place to live and do business, and people want to flock here, because of some of those things. I mean, I think we could make a great case for the cultural aspects of everything that we've done, that it makes it attractive, and may even be much more important than giving a bunch of money away on tax abatements. I think that we have to bring all those pieces together, and don't think that they ought to be operating and moving forward independently, and here's what we're going to do in this area, and then we'll think about something else later. I think we've got to look at this in a way that creates a 21st century place that looks forward into the future and creates something that really is exciting and inviting, and not always look backwards and just tweak some of the things that work. I'm thinking that the 21st century is going to be a much different place to live in, and we have to be ready for it. And I think a lot of people acknowledge that in certain areas we're very strong on that. And so let's, in this discussion, look broader and wider and look at what we're trying to incent people to do, and what is it that causes people to want to live here, work here, raise a family here, do all those kinds of things. I think that we're going to be sort of a one-trick pony if we think it's only going to be tax abatement that makes this happen.
You know, Mayor, I agree with you on that. And, you know, on a global basis, business is being deregulated so that they can operate globally a lot easier, but yet locally, and not just Des Moines, around the United States, they're being regulated to the point of almost criminalization. And I would like Des Moines to take a look at what can we do to make it easier for especially small business to establish in Des Moines. Bob and I worked on an issue over on Hubble Avenue for a little dress shop, and I'm not faulting staff at all. They followed what they should follow. But is there any way we can start changing some of these regulations so that the people don't have to go through what this dress shop did, or the insurance company on Southeast 14th, or any of those? You keep hearing these horror stories. And I agree with Frank. I don't think it's just tax abatement. We have to find a way to make these people feel like it's easier to come here and establish a business.
The other thing that I would suggest, Bob brought it up, that we see what our neighbors are doing in terms of, I think, what incentives and community designing. But I think that we ought to broaden that and not only look locally. I mean, we sent a sort of have a group of folks out to take a look at Portland. And the manager and I went to our sister city in St. Etienne. I mean, there are things that are going on internationally that people are looking how they move people around, what a city looks like, how it connects residential areas to commercial areas to life needs requirements, shopping and doctors and all those kinds of things, and how do you create a city of the future and that uses less resources, is greener, and in addition to some of the tax incentives that we're talking about, really sets Des Moines apart from the rest of the country as a great place, an innovative place to be. And it may, I think that the council, with all the ideas that came out today, might want to either as a whole, or maybe we have a committee or something that sits down and talks about this kind of stuff as you guys think of the final proposal that you bring forward in the next 30 days or whatever. Does anybody want to?
Maybe the Economic Development Committee?
Well, could be.
You know, it's a kind of issue that, I mean, you've had great discussion here, and I'd really think it'd be appropriate to hear from everybody on the council. So if you want to have that kind of a broader discussion, really two options: to either do it at a workshop or one of these days, it wouldn't be a bad idea to go back and revisit the goals that you established some years ago. We had a bit of a retreat, worked really well. Those goals, I think there were 10, have guided us in a lot of ways through the things that we've done since that period of time. And it might not be a bad idea to go back and revisit some of that, Mr. Mayor. I think a lot of the points you just made relate to those broader issues that we work on as a city, and perhaps that's an appropriate thing. But I think a retreat to do that might be worthwhile, or a discussion here at a workshop at a minimum.
Any other questions or comments by the council this morning? If not, let's open it up for any comment from anybody from the audience, public, or looks like we've got a media person here that might be writing a rather real extensive treatise on the future of the green economy. But anybody have any comments? Seeing no one, thank you all for coming, and remember, we've got an exciting city council meeting this evening. Thank you. We're adjourned.